What if I told you Jesus came to abolish religion? What if I told you voting Republican really wasn't his mission? What if I told you Republican doesn't automatically mean Christian, and just because you call some people blind doesn't automatically give you vision? I mean, if religion is so great, why has it started so many wars? Why does it build huge churches but fails to feed the poor? Tell single moms God doesn't love them if they've ever had a divorce, but in the Old Testament, God actually calls religious people whores. Religion might preach grace, but another thing they practice. Tend to ridicule God's people. They did it to John the Baptist. They can't fix their problems, and so they just mask it, not realizing religion's like spraying perfume on a casket. See, the problem with religion is it never gets to the core. It's just behavior modification, like a long list of chores. Like, let's dress up the outside, make it look nice and neat. But it's funny, that's what they used to do to mummies while the corpse rots underneath. Now, I ain't judging. I'm just saying, quit putting on a fake look. Because there's a problem if people only know that you're a Christian by your Facebook. I mean, in every other aspect of life, you know that logic's unworthy. It's like saying you play for the Lakers just because you bought a jersey. See, this was me too, but no one seemed to be on to me. Acting like a church kid while addicted to pornography. See, on Sunday I'd go to church, but Saturday getting faded, acting if I was simply created to just have sex and get wasted. See, I spent my whole life building this facade of neatness, but now that I know Jesus, I boast in my weakness. Because if grace is water, then the church should be an ocean. It's not a museum for good people, it's a hospital for the broken. Which means I don't have to hide my failure, I don't have to hide my sin. Because it doesn't depend on me, it depends on Him. See, because when I was God's enemy, and certainly not a fan, He looked down and said, I want that man. Which is why Jesus hated religion, and for it He called them fools. Don't you see so much better than just following some rules? Now let me clarify. I love the church, I love the Bible, and yes, I believe in sin. But if Jesus came to your church, would they actually let Him in? See, remember He was called a glutton and a drunkard by religious men. But the Son of God never supports self-righteousness, not now, not then. Now back to the point, one thing is vital to mention. How Jesus and religion are on opposite spectrums. See, one's the work of God, but one's a man-made invention. See, one is the cure, but the other's the infection. See, because religion says do, Jesus says done. Religion says slave, Jesus says son. Religion puts you in bondage, while Jesus sets you free. Religion makes you blind, but Jesus makes you see. And that's why religion and Jesus are two different clans. Religion is man searching for God. Christianity is God searching for man. Which is why salvation is freely mine, and forgiveness is my own. Not based on my merits, but Jesus' obedience alone. Because He took the crown of thorns and the blood dripped down His face. He took what we all deserved. I guess that's why you call it grace. And while being murdered, He yelled, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Because when He was dangling on that cross, He was thinking of you. And He absorbed all your sin and He buried it in the tomb, which is why I'm kneeling at the cross saying, come on, there's room. So for religion, no, I hate it. In fact, I literally resent it. Because when Jesus said, it is finished, I believe He meant it.
I think that really captures what I was hoping to preach about today well, to where I don't feel like it's not really worth me talking about it, but nonetheless, it's today's topic, and it's a pretty significant one within the church today. And I want to clarify first that when we talk about religion within the scope of our country, or even when we talk about religion to our neighbors, to our family, ultimately, one of the things that we picture is the church, right? Religion is church. As a matter of fact, if you go to our Facebook account, or even if you look us up on Google, you will find that Epicenter is a religious organization. And religion is really attributed to church. Now, the interesting part is that religion has a really negative connotation to it. It's got this really negative attachment to it. When we think about religion, we think about, at least for people that maybe are not within the church, they think about all the negative things that have come throughout history, right? In the name of religion, people have killed. In the name of religion, the Twin Towers were knocked over. In the name of religion, people hate others. So religion has this negative connotation. Now, the Bible does talk about religion, and when it talks about religion, it seems to almost have like a twofold view on it. There is a religion that the Bible talks about, but then there's also a religion that the Bible addresses that is negative. It's always looking at it from a negative perspective. And if you look at what religion does, is it typically brings in people, and what it is seen as is behavior modification, right? So you come to the church, you give into a religious system, it modifies your behaviors, and ultimately you become a better person. That's the way that religion is viewed. And you might be saying, yeah, that's kind of what I'm in for. But I want to really help you understand what the Bible describes, and even though the result will be the same, the method and the avenue to get there is very different. When we look at religion, there are many religions. As a matter of fact, I believe it says it on your worship program. It is estimated to vary from the middle thousands all the way to 10,000 religions that exist in the world. There are a number of religious systems. Throughout my time in ministry, even prior to ministry, this last week actually, I just had a conversation with somebody that I was working with, and they started talking about the church that they were a part of. Now, they didn't know that I was a pastor, and they just started talking about religion, and I told them, oh, that's really interesting. What made you adhere to that religion? Now, women, you have to understand that you have a sense of power within your grasp where you could draft people into the church or push them away from their faith. And for him, it was his girlfriend that ultimately made him come into this religious system, and it was Latin Catholicism. And as we start talking about it, I'm like, so, like, why do you adhere to it, right? And he's like, well, basically, all religions are the same. They're all exactly the same. And I told him, not really, but okay, keep on going. I'm kind of curious to hear your take on it. And he said, well, religion all kind of teaches you the same thing, exactly what the gentleman said in the opening video. It's behavior modification. In other words, they're all helping you to become a better person. And we all believe in the same God. And I told him, as a matter of fact, we don't. Because the way that we view God ultimately will determine the way that we worship him, and even the things that we do and what we believe we're contributing. So when we started talking about it, I told him, so for example, in my faith, I don't believe that I have to kneel down every time in a certain time period of the day in order to pray like other gods. In my religion, I believe that I could actually get to know God, where in other religions, God is unknown, or at least you can't have a personal relationship with him. In other religions, you have to do in order for God to do as well. So when you really break it down, it's not the same religion. You might say it's the same God, but it's not the same God, because my God doesn't demand something in return for what he has done. In other religions, you have to do for God to do. We started talking about this, and as we start talking about the different views of religion and the different things that religion pushes, I told him, you see, the issue is that ultimately when you get down to the focal point of what the issue is, it's not religion, it's ultimately how the book is interpreted that develops religion. The way that we view what the Bible is saying interprets what we do in order to get God's attention or gain God's favor. And religion becomes this terrible, infectious disease within the church, because it causes many issues that God never intended for there to be. We think that religion is the cure, religion is the issue. Just as it was mentioned in the opening clip. And whenever we start talking about religion, I've talked about this in the past in different churches, and it seems like in every situation, there is always one verse that comes up, and they're like, well, the Bible talks about religion, and it talks about it being good. And it's James chapter 1, verse 27, where it says this: pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father means caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. So now we see, right? The Bible does display religion in not a negative aspect, in a positive one. There is true religion, there is pure religion, there is good religion that will ultimately lead to these facets coming down. You're going to care for people that are in need. And one of the things that is often overlooked in this verse is what follows, right? Caring for orphans and widows in their distress, but refusing to let the world corrupt you. That's often overlooked. Religion becomes everything else on top except the part in the bottom, which is holiness. That's what religion is. Do you understand that the issue already starts in how we compartmentalize religion? Religion is going to be me doing something, but it doesn't necessarily mean behavior modification. Sometimes, for people, it's behavior modification, and the other things are also important, but if I don't do them, it's good. It's fine. We take religion and we begin to, what is real religion in the sense of God's eyes, and we begin to piece it. Like, well, this is good, and that's one of the things that, it was interesting as I was talking to this gentleman about religion, how he goes, well, I mean, I don't have to believe everything that the church teaches as long as I believe that there is a God. And I told him, then how can you trust the rest of it? Like, how can you trust what God is revealing about himself when you can't even trust what the Bible teaches? And often we look at the Bible in this way. Now, the interesting part of it is that, once again, we see religion in this way and we think, well, that's religion. The Bible talks about religion, and it's good, it's pure, it's genuine. That's what we're supposed to do. But then, check this verse out where it now bashes religion. And it says, it's going to take me a while to not look that way. Man, okay. And it says, they will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. Stay away from people like that. Now, I think that most of you can probably attest to this, whether it's relatives, whether it's neighbors, whether it's church people. You know people who act really religious, but they're not really godly. They know the things to say. They display the things that you should do in public, but there's that essential piece that is missing. They act religious, but they refuse godliness. They know what to say, they know what to do, but they're not there. And there's a reason the Bible tells us, hey, stay away from people like that. Because even in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33, it says, bad company corrupts good character. The people that you hang out with will corrupt you. They will influence you. You have to be cautious, right? So there will be people within the church, outside of church. You will see people from many religions that will act religious. I mean, I remember one time we were at the Mall of America, and I see this guy, and he's like, he has this mat, he rolls out his mat, and he is in the middle of the mall, and he just stops what he's doing. He's working, but he stops what he's doing. He kneels down, and he starts to pray. That's devotion. But that's religion. Because he believes that in some sense, he is gaining God's favor by doing that. And the Bible is clear. Hey, there's people that will act religious, but stay away from them. They're not good for you. They're bad juju. You know, they're not going to help you. Now, I want to read it in context because at times we can't differentiate both, right? Religion and faith. We think that they're both the same. They're not. Now we're seeing, right? There's pure and genuine religion that ultimately has a byproduct of caring for people in need. And ultimately, there is a factor that plays into the way that we conduct ourselves in the world, refusing to let the world corrupt you. And then there's the religion that we're told here to stay away from. Stay away from people like that act religious, but they're not godly. Stay away from people like that. So I want to read it in context as to, then that way you could see what we're talking about. This is what James chapter 1, verse 26, before the one that we just tackled, states. If you claim to be religious but don't control your tongue, you are fooling yourself and your religion is worthless. Are you seeing how religion ultimately can be manufactured, but it's not genuinely godliness? And then it goes on to say, pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father is caring for orphans and widows in their distress and refusing to let the world corrupt you. So let's go back just to where we were at before. If you claim to be religious, right? If you claim this religion that is pure and genuine and good, that comes from God the Father, but you can't control your tongue. Let's go back to 2 Timothy chapter 3. You're acting religious, but you're not godly. You're only fooling yourself. You're not there. And your religion is worthless. I want to use a very pointed and probably one of a moment in my faith journey, especially in my brokenness, that really struck me deep and almost made me go the opposite way at one point. 2 years ago, my life fell apart. And it was a difficult season of life. Now I'm sharing this because there's a point to it. And I believe that we had people within the faith community that after my shortcoming, my incredibly great shortcoming, I prayed that there would be grace. I prayed, one of the things that we think about is, man, if somebody ever did something to my kid, I hope that they would forgive them, right? And in a sense, I'm thinking, well, maybe we'll receive that kind of grace, even though it's undeserved, even though I don't deserve it, at least that there is some sense of mercy, understanding at least, just a little bit of understanding. And I remember this one individual that came up to my wife and I and laid into me. And I think the most heartbreaking thing for me was that this person had actually done a similar thing. And you get to this point where it's like, well, grace for me, not for thee. And it's almost like along the lines you miss the message. Right? Hey, I received grace at one point, but that grace was not extended. Even before that conversation erupted, I remember thinking and talking to my wife and being like, I know that I screwed up, and I don't expect grace, but there was a few people that I knew some more, and I'm like, I pray. And in their defense, it kept on going back and forth, but they started blaming my wife, they started blaming me, and for sure me, I deserved it. But I remember thinking, it's like, here is this religious fanatic who has failed to remember the gospel. The gospel of mercy, grace, and forgiveness. At times we do a really good job at becoming religious people that fail to remember the concept of grace. At times we fail to remember the mess that we're saved from. And at times, we even fail at the godliness part. I have failed. There's no excuse for it. I have failed. But you have to understand that the reason that at times people go the opposite way from Jesus is not because of the message itself. It's because of the religious people within the church. And at that point, that was one point in my life that I thought, I don't know that I can ever come back from this. I think it's impossible. Religious people will set a standard that they couldn't meet, but they expect you to meet. You have to understand religion and faith are very different things. And there was that example, right? If you claim to be religious but don't control your tongue, and that was that was fully visible. There was no controlling tongue. You're only fooling yourself. That was a damaging moment for my wife and I. And it came from the church. Religion is part of the issue, part of the cancer, part of the infection within the church. It is when we begin to believe that we are better than thou. God never came so that we, or Jesus never came so that we could actually be self-righteous. It was so that we could understand our brokenness and our need for him. So once again, you're seeing that religion starts to break down and begins to unfold when we begin to believe that we are religious because of what we do, but we are not exemplifying the godliness that should be developed, controlling our tongue, right? And what's another byproduct? It is that pure and genuine religion in the sight of God the Father is caring for orphans and widows in their distress, right? That's a byproduct. I'm doing because that's what God is calling me to do, but not out of obligation. And refusing to let the world corrupt me. I'm not going to continue to go down the path that I'm going in. And when I do, guess what? I'm going to get up and I'm going to go back to Jesus. So now I want to read the second part of this. The 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 5, where it says, there will be people who act religious but reject the power that can make them godly. I want to read it in context now. Here's the context of it. Because we're here right now. You should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times, for people will love only themselves and their money. That's the American dream. They will both be boastful and proud, right? I mean, we have pride parades all over the place. Scoffing at God. Yeah, right, God doesn't exist. Disobedient to their parents. I mean, that's like the trend right now. Being ungrateful. They will consider nothing sacred. They will be unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self-control. That you find within the church. You don't have to go outside the church walls. They will be cruel and hate what is good. Just turn on the news. They will betray their friends. They will be reckless, be puffed up with pride, and love pleasure rather than God. I have failed, right? They will act religious, but they will reject the power that could make them godly. Stay away from people like that. Okay, so what's the issue? It's that they're doing everything else that we're not supposed to be doing. It's not a struggle. So let me just say this. At times within the church, we say that because somebody did something, then they must not be saved. There is a very big difference between a struggle and a practice. A struggle is something that you're trying to get rid of. A practice is something that you've normalized. It's just part of your life, right? And God's going to accept you because you do it no matter what. That's a practice. A struggle is pleading with God to help you overcome the difficulties, struggles, and addictions that you're facing in your life. There's a very big difference. And guess what? You can fool people, but you can't fool God. You can act religious, but you will never develop godliness in your practices. So now we're seeing, hey, there's a very big difference. And here's the point of it, right? Religion is man's attempt to earn God's favor and to work our way back to him. That's what religion is. If I do, God will do. If I can just do the things that God is calling me to do, he'll love me more. He'll do for me because I'm doing for him. That's religion. We're saved by works. That's not what the Bible says. It is by faith that you have been saved, not by works that you should boast. It is God's free gift. You can't do anything to earn salvation. I can't do anything to earn salvation. I've said this quote many times, and I love it, but I can't remember exactly where the quote comes from, but it is, the only thing that we contribute to salvation is a sin that made it necessary. That's the only thing that we can contribute to salvation. Because we can't do anything. We're sinful people, and we contributed that so that Jesus could go to the cross. And one of the things that we fail to understand is when religion happens is we think that if we could just put enough money into the bank, God's going to cancel that debt, right? So within Catholicism and some other religions, they will word it in a way that is a little bit different, but ultimately the way that it works is there's a balance. If you do more good that outweighs the bad, then ultimately you're good. And there's a set of rules that you have to follow, a lot of extra biblical practices. But you know what the Bible says? That while we were still enemies of God, he sent his son at just the right time so that he could save us. While we were still enemies. You know what an enemy can do? Nothing, because he's opposing the one who is trying to conquer. Let me give you a better example. Jesus cancels our debt, right? Because we're spiritually bankrupt. Now, I've never been in this position. Definitely been in times where it's difficult financially. But a person that is bankrupt files for bankruptcy because they cannot pay back the debt that they owed. It's impossible. That is the way that the Bible describes our condition. We're spiritually bankrupt. Even when the Bible says that our good deeds look like filthy rags before the sight of God. Even our good deeds aren't that good. And it's kind of interesting as I've talked to people about this because, once again, they're religious people at times. And they're like, well, I've cared for orphans. I've cared for people in the streets that don't have anything to eat. And it's like, okay, those are good things. But now here's the issue. The fact that you're letting someone know, at the heart of it already starts with an issue. It means that you're doing because one of two things. You want to be recognized for what you did, or second of all, the heart of the issue is pride. You're doing because of your religious practices. You're not doing because you care for people. You're doing because you're hoping that it's recognized. Religious people do things. Now, here's the thing. Is the Bible telling us to go and adopt an orphan or to go and adopt a kid that maybe is born without the ability to be nurtured and cared for? Yes and no. There's an obligation. If you're able to meet it, meet it. Should you put yourself in that position if that's not where God is calling you to? No. But we do have a responsibility to care for them. So here's the way that it breaks down. Religious people do because ultimately they feel that it is an obligation that they have in order for them to be good. Godly people do because they see that there is a need, and out of a response of godliness, they respond to it. I'm simply doing because God called me to do that. And there is no heart in it for the religious people, right? It's simply, we're doing... It's kind of like when I was growing up, my mom would wake us up for church, and I knew that it was Sunday, I knew what we had to do, and it was kind of like, oh my goodness, Mom, It's like, why can't they start like at noon? That'd be great. And I remember just like going in, kicking and screaming. Why was I going? Because I knew that I had an obligation, not because I wanted to go. That's religion. Godliness is, I want to be a part of this because I know that there's a need, and the Spirit inside of me is calling me to go and do, right? Godliness, here's the one thing we have to remember, and this is where it gets really confusing and really tricky within the church. Godliness is not void of religious practices, but your actions are not the measurement of your religious belief. Let me repeat that. Godliness is not void of religious practices, but your actions are not the measurements of your religious belief. In other words, you're going to do things that are religious, but that's not how you're measuring how good you are. For religious people, it's the opposite way, right? If I'm doing more religious things, that means that I'm more godly. That doesn't mean that. That just means that you're very religious. When you are a godly person, the byproduct of your actions is that. It's faith. It's a spirit. It's God calling you to do these things. But it's not out of obligation. You want to do them. There's been times that I find myself try to balance life. And when I'm doing that, it's really difficult because at times I feel like I'm failing one department or I'm failing another, right? During those times, you can always tell what is the most important thing in my life. And here's the reason that you can tell. Because one will be sacrificed and the other one will take priority, right? When I am devoted to something, that will always take priority. There's been times that I have failed my family. And I've said, hey, it's not because it doesn't matter. It's just more so like there's something. And you start to kind of try to make excuses. And as soon as I get a self-check of, hey, you're going astray, One of the things that I've realized in these last 2 years is that I've tried to overcompensate in a good way. But it's like, hey, I know that I failed, and I need to do this, but my family needs this. Your devotion will ultimately be a response from where your heart is. Religion does because they think you get. Faith, devotion, godliness does because you want in on it. Because you are devoted, you are in love with Jesus. You know that he's calling you because there is a need, and ultimately you can meet that need, not because of what it means for your ego, not because of how it will work into your pride, not because people are going to notice, not because people are going to see, not because people will say, man, they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. No, it's because I know that there's a need. And once again, godliness meets the requirement of religion because it's birthed out of a responsibility that, hey, we want to do something. Now, I want to start wrapping up with this because this is really the point of it. When you look at religion, when you look at faith, when you look at the byproduct of both, we think, and similar to what we've experienced with some people, there are people within the church, and I can't say whether they're saved, whether they're not, because that's not for me to judge. Ultimately, I'm here to preach the word, and I'm here to ultimately pray for people and pray for God to lead me in the right way, even when I begin to go astray. But one of the things that you will see is that religious people will always try to hold on to their performance. And you see it over and over again, right? Religious people, performance, godly people, it's all by faith. I'm only doing because God is calling me to, and because I believe that this is what God is leading me down to do. It is living by the Spirit. One of the interesting passages in the book of Matthew in chapter 7, and it's regarding the Sermon on the Mount. We often think that Jesus' teachings were pretty, even when you look at Jesus throughout his ministry, he's always criticizing the religious leaders. He calls them spiritually blind. It's a blind leading the blind. And when we look at the teachings of Jesus, we think, well, everybody, he's always all for the people that are doing the right things. And while God calls us to do the right thing, one thing that we often think is that doing the right thing is what makes us Christians. That's not it. This is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21. Tendency to go that way. Not everyone who calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only those who actually do the will of my Father in heaven will enter. So once again, some people will say, well, those that do the will of my Father in heaven will enter. That's like ultimately I'm doing, God does. No, here's the issue. On Judgment Day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, we prophesied in your name and cast out demons in your name and performed many miracles in your name. Right? So they're doing all the right things. But Jesus will reply, I never knew you. Get away from me, you who break God's law. Are you understanding how this works with religious people? They think that because they did, they will get. And religious people will give this appearance that they are godly people too, right? Hey, I love Jesus just like you love Jesus. And they're convinced that they are saved. But the issue is that their trust is not in Jesus, their trust is in their resume. See, I'm saved because of what I did. So I want to kind of summarize it really quick and close in prayer. It is estimated for sure that there's over 5,000 religions. It is more likely closer to 10,000 worldwide. And there are many religions that will lead you down many paths. There are many gods along the way that ultimately say that they are the way to God. And many people say, well, how can you say that your God is right from all those thousands of religions? And the reason why is for a number of reasons. As we've been looking through the Series X, we've realized that the claims that the Bible makes not only has historical evidence that it is true, not only is it grounded in logical reasoning of how the universe came into existence, not only are there claims that are validated biblically and archaeologically, we see it over and over again, that the Bible, everything that it's speaking with reason, it's speaking with logic, even though it seems irrational to the people that are trying to make sense of it from a natural perspective. And in every other religion, here's the issue. All of them try to attempt behavior modification on your attempt. You have to try harder. You have to do. And one of the things that the Bible says is you can't do. That's the reason that Jesus did. Because you couldn't do it. It's David Platt. He uses, he's a pastor, and he uses this example. If religion was a mountain, if there was a mountain to get to God, religion is man's attempt in trying to climb that mountain to get to him. Christianity is actually God coming down from that mountain and meeting us down on the bottom. That's what Christianity is. In every other religion, you're trying to get to the summit through many ways. In Christianity, it is the only faith that teaches that God in his mercy understands that it's impossible for us to climb. It's like trying to climb Mount Everest without any gear. You're going to fail. I mean, there's no way that you will succeed. That's what the Bible teaches us. There's no way that you're going to succeed on your own because you're spiritually bankrupt, you're spiritually broken, your nature spiritually is not even there until God puts his Spirit in you. And until you have God's Spirit living within you, guess what? You're banking on religion. You're not banking on faith. So I want to encourage us, once again, at times it's difficult because it seems like when you're bashing or when you're speaking against religion, people are like, well, then what kind of church are you? We're a church that is grounded in Jesus. And guess what? There will be behavior modification along the way. No doubt about it. But it's not because you think that that's getting you somewhere. It's because Jesus is going to begin to convict you of every garbage in your life, and you're going to be overwhelmed by the guilt of doing those things. And in return, think about it this way. It's like when you begin to try to eat healthy, and then you realize that salad is not as bad as you thought it was, and then you begin to start losing weight, and you're shedding, weight, and you're getting shredded, and then all of a sudden you eat some wings, and you're like, holy smokes, this feels like I just ate a cow, That's what happens. It's behavior modification. But it's not because you're trying to do it. It's because God is doing it. You're eating all the good stuff and you're like, how was I getting filled with all this garbage? There's nothing there. And once again, it's not because you can, it's because God did. So I want to encourage you, once again, especially now with hanging up that banner outside that says, tired of religion, Jesus was too. I am sure that there will be no shortage of people that might ask, well, then what kind of church is it? We're a Christian church. We're just not banking on religion to save us because it can't. So with that being said, I just want to encourage you as you continue to walk down your faith path, as we continue to walk down that faith path together, just know that along the way, because we are broken people, it will still get messy. But at the same time, that's the reason that Colossians says to make allowance for each other's faults, to forgive one another just as Christ has forgiven us. We're messy people, but we're not holding on to our performance. Now we're praying that God continues to do a work in our lives, and it's going to continue until the day that we die. That's what Philippians says. Being convinced of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion on the day of the Lord Jesus Christ. It begins when we surrender our life to Jesus. It ends the moment that we die. So once again, we are not a religious people. You will see religious byproducts along the way, but it's not because we're banking on those. It is because ultimately God is doing an incredible work in people's lives.